Okay, so quick round of introductions. Would love to welcome Melanie from the team at Universal Ads.
Hi, thank you, Ada. I'm Melanie Kaufman, Director of Measurement Science at Universal Ads. I lead measurement strategy and experimentation across first-party analytics and third-party partnerships to help brands quantify what's driving performance, and a lot of the time, specifically incremental performance. So I'm very excited to be here to dig into how we approach that for Obvi.
And Ronak, give you an opportunity to just quickly introduce yourself.
Hey guys, my name is Ron Shah. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Obvi. We're a health and wellness brand focused around women's health, especially as they go into their midlife.
So one of the things that we're mainly addressing today is the challenge between impression level data and view level data and the P&L, where we're looking at revenue. Historically, it's been really easy to understand connected TV and even linear TV, but really challenging to understand the impact on retail, for example, and removed the challenges of retail media and connected TV operating in completely different silos. If you can't prove incremental retail impact, you just can't scale CTV with confidence. Melanie, I know that there was a really natural commitment from Obvi to leverage Universal Ads for this test and their decision to scale. Can you share a little bit more about why Universal Ads was chosen?
For Obvi, it wasn't just about efficient CTV. It was really about reaching the right audience in a big screen environment where their message could break through and influence purchase behaviors, all with measurement in mind from the start. And Universal Ads made sense for three main reasons. First was access to premium streaming inventory that has scale. This allowed Obvi to reach consumers where they're increasingly spending their time and discovering new brands and finding shopping inspiration. A second was the ability to reach audiences in a way that aligned to retail outcomes, because the primary focus here was sales, not just impressions. Third was built-in measurement rigor. With Lifesight's test framework as our blueprint, we were aligned to helping Obvi determine the incremental impact of their first ever Universal Ads campaign. And I would say ultimately our collective goal was to have trust and accountability as well as visibility into performance.
One of the biggest things that happened with Obvi is we started to grow into retail pretty tremendously. We focused on our growth in D2C for the first 5 years, but the last 2 years, retail became a very, very interesting subject for us. As we started to open more doors, we obviously started to see velocity grow and revenue grow. But one of the things that was challenging for us was figuring out how do we actually manage the marketing and where to spend our dollars when it comes to retail, because it's not as simple as putting $1 in and getting X amount of dollars back out. And so when we started to test something like connected TV, we wanted to see not only how does that channel perform, but we wanted to understand, can connected TV drive incremental in-store revenue? Can we actually map that out and see, is there a lift in new demand or is there channel overlap? Are we able to get down to a number of how much we can spend and expect XYZ amount of return, especially when it comes to driving sales in a key retailer for us, which is Walmart?
So this is where measurement becomes really critical. So how do you isolate the impact of media? And from a measurement standpoint, this is a gap we see across categories. Impressions are relatively easy to report, like you said, and sales tend to be measurable, but connecting the two in a causal way, that's where it kind of gets interesting or challenging, especially with retail where multiple channels can influence the same outcome. So to achieve this clean and clear look, we partnered with Lifesight to run a geo-based incrementality experiment using Walmart in-store revenue as the primary performance indicator. There were 7 high exposure states to form the treatment group, or those markets that received Obvi's Universal Ads campaigns, and then 14 match states to serve as the control group. And this setup allowed us to compare outcomes between the exposed treatment and unexposed control regions to really isolate the effect of the campaign. And it's noted on the slide, but I want to call it out too, that this was not modeled attribution, but actually a controlled test designed to measure causal impact. Also, success was defined upfront. detecting at least a 5% lift with a 95% statistical confidence, so that we would know the results were going to be grounded in a rigorous and intentional approach. And 5%, to contextualize that, when it's a big part of your business like it was for Obvi, that's really meaningful and translates to real world impact. By defining the success and setting it up with you, Lifesight, we're not basing decisions off of assumptions. Really, after a test, you're going to build upon measured outcomes. So I'm excited to pass it back over to Ronak to share what we learned and the results.
Yeah, we saw phenomenal results. I think what's really interesting is we've been so used to spending money on Meta. And so for us to, first of all, find a channel that was also working and then to identify how well it's working was really cool to see. And so with a 95% statistical confidence, we were able to see that there was a clear lift in Walmart sales from our connected TV ad. We were able to see the incremental revenue did come from the new awareness that was driven through connected TV. And being able to utilize Lifesight's tool to be able to see some of these things, not just on what is theory for most part for many brands, for us, it was actually real numbers on the paper, which was really nice to see. And then we were able to go and actually scale our spend by almost 2.4x our budgeting, because we were able to validate, if we invest this, we should be able to get this. We really removed the whole assumption layer, which is really ability to give us not only a new channel to rely on, but a channel that we can go and now put into our model and actually model out and say, hey, here's how much we're going to now spend with high levels of confidence. It was really cool to see that.
Awesome. Love it. Love to see it. And I think one of the points that we wanted to make here was that 5% is a lot, right? I think sometimes people will look at that 5% and think that that's not a super relevant amount. Just what the accuracy of this test did for you.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at universal ads, connected TV, I think knowing that it can drive awareness and people to the door and get people to buy, that was important to know. But knowing how much is the most important piece, right? Because that's going to allow you to create a function of how much you can spend then. I think the cool part here is this isn't just something you have to throw at the wall and hope that it works. Because you guys allow for the ability to do incrementality testing, you're able to really validate how much to spend and what that spend is going to bring without having to go and literally go spend your whole wallet. And I think the testing piece in this is the part that gave us a lot of confidence to take that leap of faith, because otherwise it feels pretty daunting to start a new channel like connected TV in a new environment like retail, all while the unknowns are like, wait, is this going to work? And that's why I think utilizing Lifesight has been so powerful for us, because we're able to validate how some of these things are going to work, what is the incremental value that's coming out of it, but then also being able to say, well, if this is actually what's working, then we can go back it up with the XYZ budget moving forward on new tests.
Awesome. Fantastic. So the future of CTV is definitely one where I think we see a lot of CPG brands jumping in, being very thoughtful about new channel strategies and expanding their media mix. CTV is super popular right now. And big part of that is because platforms like universal ads are giving great audiences, great data, and investing in partners to ensure that causal understanding of what the impact truly is.
From what we're seeing, measurement expectations have evolved quickly over the last few years, just as I would say quickly as the retail media landscape has. And CTV has moved from being really just only upper funnel to playing a much more direct role in driving full funnel performance. And that shift is driving increased pressure, like you said, to validate the impact, not just report on delivery or in audience metrics. So as a result, we're seeing more adoption of incrementality. That's like the standard approach when it comes to this convergence. Because it measures causal impact, it can inform and calibrate other methods like marketing mix modeling and attributed metrics. So I also would say in a highly competitive category like wellness, especially with retail and offline sales, just the combination of reach and strong measurement, all of this coming together will make a big difference for their business.
So Ronak, rapid fire question. How often should brands be testing?
I think brands should be testing all the time right now, especially within this world of AI. But I think you need to be testing for incrementality first, rather than just testing to test to find the next channel.
And when you're looking at Lyft, how is that going to shape your 2026 planning as the year continues?
Yeah, I think Lyft is allowing us to start to finally build confidence in our model versus before the model was more off of assumptions of, oh, well, I think this is what's going to happen. I think this is what's going to see. Whereas now we can take an element like, hey, we saw this lift. Well, if we actually go and take that linearly and apply that against our model, what can we see next? What can we do next? And how will that kind of back out? So we've been able to now build a new financial model that is built off of lift, not just an assumption, which is always a great input to be able to have now.
So yeah, rapid fire questions. Melanie, what qualifies as strong incremental lift?
It depends, really. It depends on the category, baseline levels, margin structure. But from my perspective at Universal Ads, there are three things that I look for that we've talked about throughout the presentation. First is statistical confidence. Typically a 90 to 95% confidence that the effect is real in the real deal. We do sometimes look at test designs that are 80% or higher if we want to do something directional or we're just trying to test the waters. But of course, we want to iterate with confidence. Second, clear separation between balanced control and treatment groups. So we know that it's a causal impact rather than a correlated one. Just avoiding contamination or any lack of understanding in the variance that we would see. That's what we want to stay away from so that we can really believe it. And then third is whether the lift exceeds that predefined success threshold set before the test even begins. If it's under, the study can't detect it, which means it's a loss of learning. So we always tend to look for that. I will say our benchmarks show that 5% is pretty typical for first to CTV advertiser. But the upper bound of that performance can be 8, 10, 12% or higher. I would say the size of the lift really matters less than what it translates to for the business. And then I would say the room for growth within a channel. So, yeah.
And then lastly, Melanie, how does privacy impact CTV measurement?
Yeah, one of the reasons incrementality, specifically geo-lift testing, is gaining momentum is because it's privacy resilient by design. And I think you touched on this in the very beginning, like setting the landscape, because unlike attribution approaches that depend on individual user tracking, incrementality through this methodology is a causal difference between exposed and control groups at an aggregated impression level. So this means brands can still understand marketing effectiveness, and that's regardless of signal availability and how that may change over time or it declines in the ecosystem. Privacy changes are accelerating the whole industry shift towards incorporating this type of gold standard experimentation within a broader holistic measurement framework. So they're MTA, MMM, and incrementality together.
I think the privacy components affect different channels in different ways. And I think thanks for the great overview of how that contributes to CTV measurement. So Melanie, question came in for you. What does the next phase of performance measurement look for you?
I think we're in this phase. If it's not the coming phase, which is performance, is going to be table stakes. It's going to become a standard. I think AI will prove a lot of its value where it reduces operational burden and really just improves overall outcomes. So thinking like bidding, pacing, creative optimization, and also measurement and testing capabilities. I would say that's also underpinned or connected to deeper integrations with like your CRMs, your commerce, your analytics, and creative platforms. So it will allow TV to become more part of like everyday marketing workflows. And then I would say, finally, the most iconic inventory and the culturally relevant content that we see on TV, that's going to increasingly become unlocked for a broader set of advertisers. And that umbrella will cover more performance. So looking ahead, it will be about consistency, measurable results, and giving advertisers confidence when they go to scale.
So the platform by which we measured all of this is Lifesight's Unified Measurement OS. This is the tool for how brands move from just reporting on performance to actually looking at operating growth. So we talked a lot about incrementality today, by far the best causal way to understand the impact of CTV on retail. And Lifesight connects streaming exposure, retail revenue, it uses causal modeling to help reallocate budget and take action on optimization.